DFP reporting for video. So this is the session number 6. And I would like to start with the main base concept about video, which is it's one of the most important concepts we need to remember here, is that video is delayed counted impressions, right? So when an ad request comes to DFP, if there is no line item eligible for that request to have an unfilled impression, just like display. If there is a line item and we select a line item on DFP, we will have a code serve. However, we will only have an impression if that video creative is rendered on the client, right? So there will be usually a gap between code served and impressions. Our documentations usually refer to that gap as unviewed impressions. So we selected a line item, but there was an error or a timeout, or the user navigated to another page too fast, and we didn't have an impression. I personally don't like that term very much. Sometimes confuses with active view and viewable impressions. So sometimes I use the term unrendered impression as well, but I guess most of our documentations will refer it as unviewed impression. All right. On display, at this point, every code serve will generate an impression. So it doesn't really matter if the display was actually displayed or rendered to the user or not. Although we are working to change that this year, we should have news. But at this point, display is non-delayed counted, but video is delayed counted impressions. Okay, and this is a very important topic for publishers, because every time you have an unviewed impression, you missed the opportunity to deliver a video ad, to deliver impressions. So campaigns may fall behind schedule. You may not deliver the amount you thought you would be able to deliver. So this is a very important item, and we need always remember this. Any questions so far? All right, so to understand the metrics and all the data we have available in reports, we need to go back a little bit to the VAST protocol. So most of the metrics we'll find on our reports will be reported by the player or our IMA SDK. So if the player is integrated with Google's IMA SDK, it's the SDK responsibility to report back these metrics. If it's not, then it's the player responsibility to parse the VAST and report back all these metrics to DFP. So on the VAST response, and let me open a VAST response here for you guys to see. So at the top, we'll always have at the main level, at the ad node level, an error node and an impression node with the respective URL to ping an error or an impression. So it's one single error and one single impression URL for the whole VAST response. Okay, the VAST response may contain one or multiple creatives, and then on each creative we will have the different metrics. So here you can see start, the first quartile, midpoint, third quartile, complete, etc., etc. And for this tracking events, we may have third-party tracking as well, or other systems. So here we can have multiple URLs for each event, but impression is only one. It's for the whole VAST response. Error, only one for the whole VAST response as well. Okay, if you are troubleshooting, or if you want to see that on the network tabs, you can see the impression filtering by ad view. So all impression URLs will have the ad view. All other trackings will have conversion. And at the end of the URL, we have a label that will describe the event for almost all of the tracking events. Just the start, which is called part 2 viewed, it's not intuitive, but all others should be very intuitive. Like, the first quartile is video play time 25. Okay, let's go back here to the presentation. So let's go deep in the video report on DFP. So the first thing everyone will think is, how can I filter all my video inventory on the reports, right? On Edge Exchange, that is very, very simple. You just filter by product equals video, and there you go. It's all your video inventories on Edge Exchange report. On DFP, on the other hand, that doesn't exist. So it's a little bit tricky to get data for video. So if you want to take a look at the video inventory, you either need to filter by add units or key values. However, that's not all publishers will have that the video inventory is separated from the display. They may use the same add units, and in that case, it's you need to rely on the request size to filter the video inventory, right? So all the requests come with a V at the end. So you can pretty much just select the ones with a V at the end to have your video inventory. So that seems to filter all the video inventory. You should be fine, but in fact, this specific dimension, the request size, will disable most of the metrics. So you can actually only get cold served and unfilled impressions with this. So if you want to have if you need to get, how much video inventory you have, including unfilled and cold served, you need to use the request size. For all other analysis, then you have the creative type, which is video creative set. So if you filter by video creative sets, you get all the impressions for video creatives. But since you're filtering for impressions, you don't have unfilled. That's why sometimes you need to use the request size to get the total video inventory, because that's the only one that will bring the unfilled impressions. And if you guys want to have an idea of specific types of creatives, so if they are hosted, if they are overlays, redirects, etc., there is a dimension called creative billing type, and that one will break down the specific type of video creatives. So if you combine all of these different dimensions, you may need to take multiple reports, but you'll be able to run a complete analysis on the video inventory.
Hey, Victor, just quick question about the viewability for video reporting. So is it like, well, maybe you can talk about the criteria for viewability, like what's considered viewable for video.
I'll get there. It's in another slide. Okay.
Cool.
All right. So we have most of the dimensions that are available for display will be available for video as well. So dates, add units, key values, it's all there. The ones that are specific to video are these four. So if the publisher is using content ingestion, you'll be able to have reports by content. If they have fallback enabled, you can understand on what fallback position that impression occurred, and I'll talk a little bit more in details about fallback in the next slide. We also have the position of pod, which is pre-row, mid-row, or post-row, if the publisher is using ad rules, or if they are defining in the ad tag what is the position of the pod. If it's a simple ad request with no position defined, we report the impression as an unknown position. And if they're using pods, so multiple ads in the same position, you can also have reports and data per pod position. Now, today we have a big limitation on these reports, especially regarding the position of the pod. So for pre-row, mid-row, and post-row, when you use this dimension, you don't get the metrics code served or unfilled impression. So currently, there's no way to know the fill rate of your mid-row, for instance, or your post-rows, right? You only get that data for the overall stream, right? That's a big limitation, especially for broadcasters. which usually have multiple use multiple mid rows and pre-rows and post rows. Good news is that we do have a beta. It's called Video Sell-Through Report. The link is here. That will work on these limitations, and then we'll have much more data and metrics, and a greater view of fill rate and other metrics as well for each specific position of pods. But if the publisher is not in the beta at this point, this will still be an issue, right? Any questions so far? All right, so fallback. Now it will start to get fun, right? So you guys probably already know about fallback. It's when we have an ad that is a redirect. DFP considers that kind of line item as unreliable, since it may fail, right? We don't have control of the third party. So you may select a chain of ads to be served. So if the first one fails, we go to the second one and continue down the chain until we have an impression or we are out of ads. The main point here is that only one code served will be registered, and that would be always for the first ad in the chain. And we always have, of course, just one impression, right? The ad that serves is the one that gets the impression. So on this example, we have a chain of 3 ads, A, B, 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 and C. A is the first one. It gets the code served. It played okay. It also gets the impression. When we go, if the A fails on this second example and B fails as well, then the impression goes to C, is the one that succeed. However, this is the most important part. The code served still goes to the first one. So the line item A will get 1 code served and 1 error. B, just the error, and C, an impression. Okay, so as you can imagine, if your first line item is failing a lot, you may have a situation where a line item is most of the times on other positions of the fallback, like the second, the third. It may have more impressions than code served, for instance. So this is something that may confuse publishers, but it's working as intended. We do have ongoing discussions to see if we can make this better. Multiple code serves, it's weird. It would cause more problems than help. So I guess the team is thinking on yet an additional metric, so we don't have this kind of confusions anymore. Worst case, when you have all of them failing, still the first one will get the code served, and then all others will get an error. Those are all unviewed impressions. Any questions about fallback? This can be tricky.
Yeah, I think basically this slide answers this, but like I've heard this request multiple times. So people are looking for the formula to calculate number of times when video was not shown to the end user.
Mm-hmm.
When fallback was enabled. So basically this slide I think answers this, but maybe we'll add add another slide with this formula, or maybe you can just talk about how to calculate this formula.
Yeah. The main point is to use code served and impressions for an inventory filtered by inventory, so add units or key value, right? So because we always have just one code served and 0 or 1 impression. So the gap between code served and impression, it's what we call the unviewed impression, and that shows the opportunity that we missed due to problems or errors or users going out of the page or something like that. Does that answer the question? So even with fallback, we still have just one code served and 1 impression. So if you had multiples, that's when it would be harder to understand. But since we have only 1 code served and 1 impression, so the difference is still valid. Even.
Yeah.
Does that answer your question?
It does. It does. So basically, the formula is like code served minus impression. So like on this slide, is basically it's going to be 1. So it's 1 opportunity to serve an ad that was not filled. So code served minus impression, and I think plus unfilled impression. like if you want to calculate the number of times when DFP did not serve anything.
Correct. Yes, plus unfilled impressions. Yeah, just make sure you call this like unviewed or unhindered, because we did have a fill on DFP. I mean, we selected a line item, so just the terminology. But you're totally right. Good. The other important metric that we get on the DFP report are errors, right? So this was introduced with VEST 3, so the version 3 of the VEST protocol. If the publisher is still using VEST 2, we don't have all of this detailed information. On VEST 2 is basically error or okay. So you can get the error count, but you have no clue of what happened. If the publisher is using our IMA SDK, we should highly recommend them to migrate to VEST 3. It's just either a configuration change on DFP UI or a change in one of the parameters of the add tag. There's absolutely no effects on the player, on the integration, because everything is handled by our SDK. If they're not using our SDK, then this could be a problem. But if they are, they should really consider moving to VEST 3, because we have all of this great information about what's going on, why an impression was not served. So we have some exceptions. So the 200s are errors that do not prevent impressions. So things start to become complicated a little bit as well on errors. Common error we see on the 200 range is the 202, when the line item has a duration and the actual media file has a slightly different duration. We have a plus or minus 2 seconds tolerance, but sometimes it can go a little bit longer than that. But anyways, if it's a 202 or any 200, the player or our SDK will error to DFP, but we still have an impression. So the total amount of errors does not really mean that all of those scenarios have not generated an impression. On the 600s that are related to companion, so 600, 601, 603, and 604 also do not prevent impressions. So even though for some reason I was not able to handle the companion, we still believe that it's important to show the main video ad, and we do that. So those errors will also not prevent an impression, right? So just another thing to keep in mind while checking errors, why we have a high number of unviewed impressions. Maybe it's a high number of 202, and that's not really a problem, right? That all other errors will prevent impressions. So those are more critical and the ones we need to work on. The full list is on Help Center. I have the link here on the presentation, so I will only cover the most common. So the 300 range are the ones related to redirects. 301, it's a timeout. 302 is if we have too many redirects, and 303, it's when we have no ads in the VEST response for the third party, right? So this is good because when publishers are using third party ad networks, we can actually know what's the fill rate, because every time they don't respond back with an ad, we have a 303. So it's possible for us using DFP reports to understand if a third-party ad network or a third-party ad server, if they are returning ads or not, or what's the fill rate on those calls. The other important range is the 400, which is related to playing the media files. So 400 is a general, 401 it's file not found, 402 it's a timeout, and 403 it happens if there is no media file supported by the video player. So those are the main errors. So and those are the ones that we usually have the opportunity to work with the publisher. Maybe they're using a media file, like a Flash media file, and try to serve that on mobile devices. That will raise a 403. Maybe the server that is hosting those files is timing out, so we will get a 402. So those are errors that are common, and we can try to work with the publisher to fix them. 901, it's a VPAID error. It's kind of a general VPAID, but if it's related to VPAID, it should go to 901. And sometimes we have a good amount of 900 that are undefined, like general errors. And these ones, like the VAS2, we don't have much information on what's going on. Then you need to go and set up a test page or open their player and see, do some tests to see what's going on. Regarding metrics, besides errors, we also have viewership metrics like start, quartiles, complete. We also have interaction, so the player will report back when we have pause, when we resume, when we rewind, when mute, unmute, and other metrics. And if it's a skippable ad, we also know when the skip button was shown, how many times it was skipped. Engaged view is if the user see at least 30 seconds, and you can actually change the 30 seconds on the DFP admin tab if you want to change that duration, but it's a network-wide configuration. And we also have view through rate, right? So the amount of users that didn't skip and watched at least either the full video or 30 seconds, which is the engaged view duration. The help center link is here with all the metrics. Another important thing is that we will always have the impression tracking URL on the VAS response, and you also have a start on the creative itself, right? Both of them are very, very similar, right? So the impression will be pinged as soon as we start playing the creative. And that's also true for the start, right? So they're very similar. In theory, based on the VAST protocol, we could have multiple creatives on the same VAST response. So you could have one impression and multiple starts. Although for DFP, this is not true, okay? We always have one impression and one start. Even on the cases we may have multiple creatives, we also, for a single line item, it will get one impression and one start, okay? Nevertheless, one important thing is that impression is the main metric for all the ad serving on DFP. And we have a very complex, with a lot of different cases, filtration system for impressions, and that does not apply to starts, okay? So it's a common scenario where impressions are a little bit less than starts, because we filter impressions with a most complex, with some complex rules. We have a DFP, we have a help center article that explains all of those scenarios and everything we do regarding filtering impressions. For the other viewership metrics, filtering is not so complex. It's mainly to prevent duplicates. So if anyone, any publisher or anyone see, impression number lower than start, that's usually okay. Those impressions, maybe most likely they're just getting filtered. Make sense? All right, active view. So we have active view support for most of the platforms. I'm sorry, we now have Chromecast. It's a new platform, and we still don't support active view there. But Flash, HTML5, iOS, and Android, they all support active view. The rule for video, it's a little bit different than display. So it's 15% of the in-stream video must be displayed for at least 2 seconds, right? In this case, we get view impression. Of course, our IMA SDK is required because this is a proprietary functionality. One thing to keep in mind, especially for the native apps, iOS or Android, usually the SDK version is hard-coded during the development, right? So in order for ActiveView to be reported and to work, we need to make sure that the app is using the iOS beta v3 or later, and Android beta v10 or later. Okay, if they are, then ActiveView it's supported. And that's pretty much it for report. Any questions?
Question on the outstream videos, so basically in banner videos. Mm-hmm. So any significant differences with reporting on those versus in-stream videos?
At this point, we don't really support outstream. What we have is native video. Although it's video for internally, we consider that as a display placement. However, it does have most of the report metrics like start, quartiles, completes that we have for video. But still, it's a display placement. So internally on our products is a little bit different. There are publishers that implement outstream using IMA SDK. And in that case, although Edge Exchange is not fully eligible, especially open auction, but nevertheless, as far as DFP is concerned, they will have access to all the metrics we have here. So it works pretty much the same. All right, if you don't have any questions, then we can go to the next topic, which I guess it's VIP8.